So when I first started sewing, I had no idea that it would take over my entire life and how little time you actually spend in front of the sewing machine, right? There is so much about sewing that it seems harmless, a hobby, and then you get sucked in and it takes over your entire life. So this is kind of like, there's a lot of things you need to know about sewing, like no one tells you to change your needle and all this sort of thing. This is not quite this. This is my guide to all new sewists and a little bit of relatable fun for experienced sewists of just when you start getting into sewing, just what are you getting yourself into when you say the words, I think I'm going to take up sewing. Welcome back, my sewing friends. It is lovely to see you again. If we are actually just meeting for the first time, welcome. My name is Evelyn Wood, and a lot of you already know that I run an online sewing school, vintagesewingschool.com, and I mean every week there we have new sewists coming in, either experienced sewists coming back to sewing for the first time a lot of the time, or brand new to sewing and are just opening their eyes to the world of sewing. And it's always so amusing to me, the things that people always comment about, that they just like, no one told me this about sewing before I started. And so I thought I'd compile a list of my things and things from my students and comments that have been made on Instagram and all this sort of thing about the weird and wonderful and wacky things that no one tells you about sewing that'll just take over your life and all this sort of thing. So just really, what are you getting yourself into when you say, I'm going to take up sewing? Okay, here is the list by myself, by you all. This is the list, like what you need to know about sewing that has actually nothing to do with sewing. Right, the first thing is that sewing is a total space hog. It will take over so much space. You need so much space to sew, to cut. You need so much space for storage. It will just take over everything because you need space to work, and then you need storage to store all of the fabric, which we'll get to later. And of course, everybody knows you absolutely do not want to be taking your sewing machines up and in and out, like unpacking and packing everything every time to do something. No one likes that. So you end up with you need machine space, then you need cutting table space, then you need iron and ironing board space, and then you need all the storage for all of the beautiful things. It just takes over so much space. Be prepared. I've warned you. Your lounge room or living room or spare room is no longer. That is the sewing space from now on. And then the next thing is that there's actually very little sewing involved in sewing. Yeah, you're going to spend 70% of your time on preparation. So that is measuring and cutting fabric, cutting patterns, pattern making, tracing patterns, washing fabric, pinning, ironing, all of these things you'll spend most of your time on, not actually at the sewing machine. Actually, I made this video here on just how much preparation is involved to make you aware of this fact, because no one tells you this before you start sewing, that it's actually not much sewing involved at all. And then I've got to warn you, there's so much to learn, and you know, it's many skills. So you're not just learning sewing at the sewing machine, you need to learn cutting, you need to learn pattern making, you need to learn measuring, pinning, ironing, and then there's actually, once you sew garments, how to fit them, how to then make the adjustments to the pattern. The list goes on and on and on. There's a lot to learn. It's not just sitting in front of the sewing machine, and it's something that you don't quite realize when you start, that there are so many other skills that you have to learn in order to make garments. And then something that you really, well, you need to know is that actually those parts are the hardest part. I had no idea. So the hardest part of sewing is not the sewing at all. That's kind of the easy part. The hardest part is all the preparation. It is, you know, preparing your fabric. It's choosing the right fabric first of all. It's then preparing the fabric. It's cutting your fabric straight. It's, you know, like the pinning and the sizing and getting the patterns right and the fit and the measuring. All that's the hard part. You can, like, sewing can be unpicked and resewn, but cutting wrong, you can't undo that. And so those are actually, all of that preparation work is actually the hardest part of sewing. that's involved. The sewing part is generally some of the easiest parts of this hobby we call sewing. I wish someone told me that before I started. One thing you are going to need to know is that, well, you're going to learn to have to say no. So what do I mean here? Well, thing is, when word gets around that you know how to sew, you're going to have lots of people come to you asking you to, can you put this button back on? Can you rehem my jeans? Can you fix up this thing? Can you make me this grand ball gown? Here's a picture of it. And you know what? I'll pay you $50 for it. Yes. So every experienced sewist, I think, knows this is quite funny memes always on Instagram. And actually on Instagram there's an account, I think it's Can You Sew This For Me? And it's dedicated just to this. It is hilarious. You should look it up. So the thing is, like when people know that you know how to sew, you're going to get asked a lot to do things for others. And it's nice to do things for others, but it does get to a point where you need to learn to say no, because otherwise it's taking up all of your precious time. This is your hobby. You've taken the time to learn it, that you want to sew things for yourself. So you need to learn to say no, and you're going to have to deal with that in your sewing life. And so how you deal with that is going to be up to you. But yeah, it's going to happen. It's inevitable, and you'll need to learn to say no. Otherwise you'll end up with no sewing time, that you'll be sewing things for yourself. And then you are going to spend a lot of money on sewing tools and fabric and equipment. Oh, yeah. There's all of your extra money, all of your disposable income goes pretty much into the hobby. So case in point, I've made several videos on sewing tools, in fact, because there are just so many, and it's half the fun. It makes the job of sewing much more fun and enjoyable, and there's fabric. There's lots of fabric. Yeah, so all of your money will be spent on sewing related items. Yeah, that's for sure. You need to know that. All of your spare cash will actually be going into sewing from now on. I think everyone needs to actually know when they start that there is no one right way to do anything. So that can be quite the hardest part sometimes, but a relief as well. When you go, search the internet for, insert sewing problem here, and all of these different solutions come up, and you're just thinking, oh my gosh, which is the right one? What am I supposed to do? There is actually no right one way to do anything. There are many different methods to get to the same result, and it depends on your style, your personality, even your abilities to how to get there. There's many different ways to get to the same result, and what works for one person and one project won't work for another. So there is no one way. Don't think that you're doing it wrong, or this way is better than that way. All the ways are valid for different people, different projects, and it is comforting to know, as well as sometimes a little bit scary when you start. You really need to know not to trust promises on these sewing patterns. So that 1 hour dress that states on the packet, well, example, 2 hours, sewing time only. Didn't we just talk about how sewing is like 70% preparation? Yes, don't trust promises either. Time, no. It takes a long time. Everything takes a really long time to make up. So do not think that you'll just whip something up in an hour or two. You need to know that. You also need to know that hoarding, or collecting fabric, I should say, is actually a separate hobby altogether, but I think that you know this already. Your friends, your family, they won't get that. Another thing that you don't realize is that, you need to know you have to actually adjust these patterns to make them fit you. So you sort of think, like a lot of people, we start sewing because we want clothes to fit us, make our own. And you kind of make it up out of the packet, and you think somehow it will just magically be different than than a garment off the rack, but it's not. It's kind of the same. And one of the most important things is to look at the finished garment measurements. That is the most important measurements. I've actually made videos about this. If you don't quite know what I'm talking about, they'll be all linked down below for you to go and watch all these videos. But yes, you need to know that finished garment measurements are more important even than the body measurements back here as to getting your size and getting these patterns to actually fit you. Something that you really need to know is that you need to be okay with imperfections. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody, doesn't matter how experienced you are. Everybody makes mistakes, but that is how we learn. You need to be prepared that you won't get it right the first time. It usually takes several times making up the same garment over and over before you get it right, before you get it perfect. It's like you need to be prepared that sometimes your expectations, your ambitions will be greater than your skill, and that's okay. Having failures is it's okay, because that is actually how you learn. You'll learn so much faster by just getting in and making those mistakes, because by doing that you realize all the things that you would do differently next time and how it works, and that is how we learn. I have made videos here on that mistakes are part of the process. It really is. That is how we learn sewing. Especially sewing, I think. And so I want you to be prepared. Don't be disappointed when things don't work out the first time, the second time, even the third time. It takes time. But that is how we learn. Be prepared and you'll be right and ready, I think, to get on with sewing and really learn. You really need to know how much ironing is involved in pressing in sewing. Again, we're back to it's not really much sewing, it's about all the preparation. Pressing, ironing, holy moly, you really definitely need to know how much of that is involved. Good pressing and ironing, actually I've made videos on that as well. It makes up for so much lack of skill in sewing. It just makes everything look so much better. It's just, you don't even know about this before you start. When you have that light bulb moment, all of your sewing gets so much better. So a good iron, a good press is needed. You'll be spending a lot of your time at the ironing board. I do like this one. Don't be alarmed, but the probability of you breaking a needle and it breaking up, flicking out in close to your face and your eye is quite high. Yeah, I don't want to scare you, but it will happen. It definitely will happen. You'll break a needle, it'll fly off somewhere. So if you wear glasses, safety first, but don't worry. I've never really heard many horror stories of it getting in anyone's eye, but just to be prepared. It will be scary, but it will happen. It's fine. Just change your needle. Keep going. It's all fine. And then, of course, after all of this, I promise, sewing is not as intimidating as it might seem. It does, in fact, take over your whole life. There is little sewing involved. All of your spare cash will be spent on money. You'll have no space left. But geez, it's such a fun hobby. And it really is fun learning and going through all of these mistakes that happen along the way. And it is a very rewarding hobby. It is both, it's calming and mentally invigorating. It gives you something to do with your hands and you get to stand back and see your creations, and it's such a rewarding hobby. And then of course you get all of the wonderful fashion that you could never buy in the shop. You get it right on you and fitted to you eventually. Eventually you get it fitted to you, right? We talked about this. There are links below down to other videos that I think that you'll really like for all of you new sewists. Here, something to help you along the way. And if you're really, really interested in getting your journey up and going along and want a bunch of other, a community of people who understand that hoarding and collecting fabric is a totally different hobby in its own, come join us at Vintage Sewing School, because all the members there, we know this, we can relate. And I would love to hear from you below. Tell me, what are the things you think that, either from my list or your own, what are the things that you like to tell people before they start sewing? What's sewing really about? What are you getting yourself into? I love to read them. I think it'll be a really fun read down below, so remember that as well. Check the description box for those links, and until next time, my friends, happy sewing. Bye.